Good morning for those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon for those of us here in the Midwest. The First Bank Center for Family Businesses presents Hancock and Kelley. I'm Mike Vanderveld and I'll be your facilitator. Before we get started, allow me to cover just a couple of logistics. The lines are muted, but at any time, please send us your questions or comments through the webinar tool. This session will be recorded and we're going to place that on First.Bank website soon after we end. That's right, First.Bank is the new URL for our website. On to slide 2, we're going to take a quick peek at our presenters and the agenda. We'll start with a conversation between John Hancock and Michael Kelley, and later we'll get a brief look at the history of election impacts on investments with First Bank's David Presson. So on to slide 3, bear with me for a moment as I read the legal disclaimer. The opinions expressed in the presentation are intended for opinions only, and they're statements of the speaker's opinion. They are not intended for informational purposes, and they aren't necessarily the opinions of First Bank. All right, before we get started, I'm pleased to welcome First Bank CEO Shelley Seifert for some opening comments.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Good afternoon. I'm Shelley Seifert, and I have the pleasure today of welcoming you to the seminar. This webinar is part of First Bank's commitment to bring our clients, our prospects, and our friends timely and relevant information through the Center for Family Businesses. Today's webinar is particularly timely given it's the afternoon before the final presidential debate. And I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to hearing about the election from individuals who are extremely knowledgeable, but bring great respect for each other. So to get us started, I am going to turn our program over now to our Vice Chairman, Joe Ambrose, who is also the Executive Director of our Center for Family-Owned Businesses. Joe?
Shelley, thanks. Welcome everybody. Our guests today are John Hancock, Republican, and Michael Kelley, Democrats, Emmy-nominated co-host of the weekly Hancock and Kelley television program on KTVI-Fox 2 here in St. Louis, and frequent radio hosts on KMOX-AM 1120. We're very happy they could both join us. Here's a very brief background on both, as I will let them tell you about how two gentlemen from opposite ends of the political debate became friends. Michael Kelley, principal of the Kelley Group. Michael founded the Kelley Group in 2004, a public affairs and advocacy consulting firm designed to assist corporate clients with political, legislative, regulatory, labor, and media issues. His clients operate in a variety of industries, including manufacturing, defense, retail, healthcare, broadcast, professional sports, and financial institutions. Mike grew up in Democratic politics and earned a degree in political science from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. John Hancock. John's political experience spans 3 decades in grassroots and electoral politics. He is a former state legislator, was the GOP nominee for Missouri Secretary of State in 1992 and 1996. Served as executive director for the Missouri Republican Party from 1997 to 2003, and operated a public affairs and political and corporate consulting business for 12 years. In 2015, John was elected to a 2-year term as chairman of the Missouri Republican Party. John specializes in campaign strategy and leadership, candidate and issue research, government relations, public opinion surveys, fundraising, event planning, public relations, and issue management. He too has a degree in political science from the University of Missouri in St. Louis. And now, without further ado, Messrs. Hancock and Kelley.
Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be with you. Good afternoon for those of you here in the Midwest. My name's John Hancock. That's my partner, Michael Kelley. 20 years ago, I was a mid-30s executive director of the Missouri Republican Party, and the guy that was my counterpart on the Democratic side, I had never met. He was in his 20s. He was just a young punk. And I was having a press conference one sunny afternoon telling the people the truth about the Democrat candidate for the U.S. Senate. This guy crashed my press conference. He brought a countervailing piece of paper and handed it out to all the press there. That was the first time I ever met Michael Kelley.
And 2 weeks later, I was having a press conference myself at Washington University in St. Louis, really telling the truth about the Republican nominee for the United States Senate, and this guy right here crashed my press conference. So we met each other by being hostile with each other.
We did. And it didn't take too much longer after that. We had a debate together before the Chamber of Commerce for Missouri. And after the debate, we spent a little time talking, getting to know each other. And eventually, over time, we worked on a couple of projects together. Then we ended up on the radio together. And then over the course of the last 18 years, he has become my misguided, very best friend. And Michael Kelley is a heart of gold. He's a great person. I would trust him with my kids. I would trust him with my money. I just wouldn't trust him with my vote.
And John Hancock is my best friend in life. We've been through so much things together. While we have completely different views, of course, mine being correct and John's being completely misguided, we've been able to have a friendship that's based on respect and understanding that we just disagree. And I think you're going to experience a little bit of that today when we have this conversation about what we know is all going, more than likely, going to be a Democratic landslide, right, John?
Well, we'll have to see about that. Let's start off what we're going to do, just to kind of roadmap through our presentation. We're going to deal with the presidential campaign first, kind of break that down for you. And then we're going to get into what I think might be the real story of this election, and that's control of the United States Senate. We'll take you through some of the competitive races and make some predictions, right or wrong, how we think that may all turn out. We'll deal a little bit with just the global political environment, as well as some changes that have taken place in the country, many of which started in the great state of California. And that's where we're going to be. And since your guy's in the lead, according to the polls, you go ahead and start in with the presidential.
Well, at least he didn't call that fake news, because that's what the president says about the polling. And if we were to look back at 2016, the president was exactly right. He said the polling was fake news, and he wound up pulling off one of the more spectacular victories that has ever been seen in American political process. Donald Trump, I would have bet my kidney in 2016 that Hillary Clinton was going to win.
Yeah, but nobody would want his kidney, let me tell you. I didn't know the guy. So basically where we are, let's look at the similarities and the differences between 2016 and 2020. Similarities, in both cases at this point in the election, the Democrat had a pretty substantial lead in the nationwide polls. And in both 2016 and 2020, the battleground state polls were looking to be favoring Hillary Clinton in 2016. They certainly look to be favoring Joe Biden this year. With those similarities, there is a pathway that Donald Trump can win the election. I'll get into that in just a minute, but here are the differences in between 2016 and 2020. Hillary Clinton was, nobody likes Hillary Clinton. And
I did.
Yeah, well, yeah. But her unfavorable rating was about 10 points higher than Joe Biden's is. So that's a difference in the election. And the other thing that we saw differently in 2016, of course, is that Donald Trump was in many respects an unknown commodity to the electorate. And folks, I think they did. They took a gamble on him. And of course, Donald Trump is much better known today than he was 4 years ago. So those are the notable differences. Walk us through what you think.
One other difference that I would argue from 2016 to 2018 is 2016, if you remember back at that, Hillary Clinton was being described as the establishment candidate, someone who was there, because of who she had been and not what she was capable of doing. Donald Trump was a disruptor. Well, we've had 3.5 years, almost 4 years now, where he's been a president and has been a disruptor. And I don't know about you, but I know my friend who I battle with on the radio has to be exhausted with constantly having to defend this president with really unorthodox beliefs and a style which has caused many issues. The other big difference that I think we have in this election that is important to note is that in the last election, we were fighting over 5 states, right? We had Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, and that's where the battle was. Now that the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, is having to defend himself in places that Republicans haven't been challenged in the past. The state of Georgia, for that matter, is leaning right now to Joe Biden. Texas, can you imagine that, is a place that's competitive now. So you have the president with less money than Joe Biden having to defend himself in some Republican strongholds. That's not the ideal situation, because remember, the president pulled off an inside straight in 2016 to be able to do this, but he had to have that rock solid support of what were easy automatics for the Republican Party. That's not the case in this election.
Yeah, well, Texas is not in play. Trump's going to win Texas. But if you go back and look at 2016, the states that Trump won in 2016 that he must maintain, and all of these states that I'm about to list are within the margin of error. In some states, Trump is up a titch. Some states, he's down a titch. I'm talking about Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, and Arizona. Those are states that are must-wins. If Trump would lose any one of those states, particularly Florida or Ohio, the election's probably going to be over pretty early on election night. That's not enough, however, for Trump to get over the hump of 270 electoral votes. At that point, if he runs that table, which he could, then he's got to win Pennsylvania, or he's got to win Michigan and Wisconsin. It's pretty much that simple. So if Trump runs that Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, Arizona table on election night, and we'll know the Eastern Coast states early in the evening, then Pennsylvania becomes the whole election. If he loses Florida, it's over.
I think you and I in 2016 in our postmortem of the election described that the president pulled an inside straight.
Right.
With what you just described, couldn't we argue that not only does he need to pull an inside straight, but he's got to win the lottery as well? I mean, this is a tall order the president faces.
Yeah, an inside straight will get her done. But you got to have the 7 of hearts coming up on the river. And if you can get that done, then, you know, he's going to be okay. But look, I predicted in 16 that Hillary Clinton was going to win. I think maybe to this very group. And I was wrong about that. So I'm a little bit cautious. I will say that Joe Biden is a prohibitive favorite at this point, but I'm not going to faint if Donald Trump ends up winning on election night. But it's going to be, if he does, it's going to be close.
So here we sit just a couple of hours before the final presidential debate. We think the president's going to show up. The president needs this debate. He needs the exposure, and he needs an opportunity to really convince suburban women. And you've heard him talking a lot about that over the last couple of months, to really come to his side. And what we're seeing throughout the country, whether you're in Missouri or in California or in Georgia, is white suburban women are coming back home to the Democratic Party. That is a real problem for the president. And so tonight, it will be interesting to see if we continue to see the disruptive, interruptive, combative President Trump, or if he allows Joe Biden to step in it himself by just allowing Joe Biden to go out there and talk. Joe Biden, who is widely respected amongst these groups, does have a propensity sometimes to have a gaffe or two. Now, we accept that the president's going to be a complete circus. We're not expecting that of Joe Biden. And so Joe Biden's got more on him tonight. The question about whether or not the president can pull this off because of this debate tonight is the real question. And don't forget, it's been close to 40 million people have already are already in the process of voting, and we're not even at election day.
Yeah, that is different as well. The number of mail-in and absentee ballots because of COVID is going to be historically significant. And those ballots, if you're tracking who's sending them in, those are going to go disproportionately in Joe Biden's favor. Republicans are much more likely to vote on election day. Democrats are much more likely to vote before election day. And most of those votes will be counted by election day in most of the states. Certainly if you're in Missouri, all of the ballots will be counted on election night, even the absentees. And so in Missouri, you're going to have the full election result on election night. That may not be true in other states. If you're in Illinois, for example, they can count, they're counting those votes. They can come in up to like, May the 3rd or something. I think it's ridiculous what they've got in Illinois. It's actually 10 days after the election. But Illinois is not in.
It's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, Biden's going to win Illinois.
So maybe the best thing we can do is give our predictions on what we think is going to happen.
Okay.
And look, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than the president did in 2016. I'm here to tell you that Joe Biden's going to get close to 10 million more votes than President Trump, but that doesn't matter, right? It comes down to the Electoral College. I think Joe Biden, led by the suburbs, which we're seeing this trend happen across the country, is going to get over 300 electoral votes and be the next president of the United States.
Well, that's awfully nice. Of course, the Electoral College, notable for its really poor football program, is going to weigh in, and they're going to decide this election. And you know, if you're forcing me to predict, I do think Biden will likely win the election. If Trump carries Florida, right now he's down, if you believe the polls, 3 or 4 points in Florida. If he wins Florida early in the night, that's going to tell us a lot about the state of polling in the race generally. I think if he wins Florida early, then I would put Pennsylvania very squarely on the table. I think Michigan's probably gone. Wisconsin's probably gone. He doesn't need them. He could get to 271 or 2 with just Florida, Pennsylvania, running all those other states, North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, and Arizona. I think there's a 1 in 5 chance that the president can pull that off. Both sides are bringing new voters. There was an undervote for Democrats in 2016, I think largely because of Hillary Clinton. You look at a state like Michigan, Mitt Romney, who lost Michigan to Barack Obama, actually got more votes in Michigan in 2012 than Donald Trump did in 2016. He carried the state because of an undervote by Democrats. I don't think that's going to happen this time. But there are a lot of these rural, high school educated white voters that live in places like Western Pennsylvania, for example, who historically aren't very good voters. They don't show up regularly. There is some evidence that Trump is getting a benefit of those folks. So both parties are hoping to bring new voters to the table. It could be a coin toss on election night. It could be a blowout. But my gut is it's going to be a lot closer than a lot of the pundits think.
This morning I read an article, and you can Google this, that the one thing that is interesting is not only were people asked in a poll, who are you voting for, and Joe Biden comes out, the question was posed, who do you think your neighbor's voting for? And Donald Trump wins that disproportionately in comparison to what we're seeing. Just an interesting outlier out there, something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
But if you agree with me that the presidency seems to be headed towards the direction of Joe Biden, the next question is what will Joe Biden be walking into in terms of the United States Senate? Will Mitch McConnell, one, be returned from Kentucky to the United States Senate, and will he be the majority leader? Or will Chuck Schumer move in to be the majority leader? And of course, we both agree that Nancy Pelosi is probably in an extremely strong position to retain the speakership and potentially even grow her margin of majority by a dozen or so seats.
So the Senate right now, in order to get to a majority, if Biden wins, the Democrats need to pick up a net 3 U.S. Senate seats. If Trump wins, then they need to pick up a net 4 U.S. Senate seats in order to take the majority. So we start with needing, let's say, plus, we'll assume a Biden victory for the purposes of talking about the makeup of the Senate. Republicans are going to pick up the seat in Alabama that Judge Roy Moore, remember him? Judge Roy Moore lost that seat. Democrat Doug Jones is vulnerable. He's going to lose to Tommy Tuberville, the coach of the Auburn Tigers out there. So now the Democrats need to get 4. I think they've got 2 in the bag. I think Arizona is in the bag for them. I think Colorado is in the bag for them. So now it comes down to 2 seats that Democrats will need to take a majority. And the places that are the hottest, not necessarily in this order, but you're looking at Maine, North Carolina, Montana, Georgia, South Carolina, Iowa, and Alaska. So what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 7 seats. The Democrats would have to win 2 of those 7 seats in order to take control of the Senate. You think Lindsey Graham's in play? I don't. I think South Carolina.
I hope Lindsey Graham's in play. He's been an enabler of Donald Trump and tearing down the institutions of the United States Senate. He's a problem. He's been an enabler. I do think Susan Collins is in trouble. And if you've paid attention for the last 4 years of the Trump presidency, when it comes to dealing with Trump's behavior, she might as well be on the left side of the aisle in terms of speaking ill about the president. Having said that, it's not registering with voters in Maine. I think Susan Collins is going to be going home for good on election day.
You know, North Carolina was looking like almost a sure pickup for Democrats until it came out. The Democrat candidate, I love you people. So the Democrat candidate was sexting with a woman. He's married. He's running as the family candidate, you know, and he's sexting with some woman out there, which really, really, really aggravated his mistress. Who then came out. So he's got a sexting partner, a mistress, and a wife. His poll numbers have, shall we say, come down a bit since then. The incumbent Tom Tillis now actually is within a point in that race. And,
quite Trumpian, that behavior, if you think about it, or Giuliani.
Or Jeffrey Tubian. But,
and we are wearing pants.
Yeah, we are. And hands up. You know, the North Carolina race, I think, is moving our way. I think we're going to be fine in Alaska. I think Joni Ernst, despite a bad debate performance where she didn't know the price of cotton or
corn in Iowa, she didn't know the price of corn.
I think she's going to be okay
in Iowa.
I think the most likely pickups for the Democrats are going to be Maine, North Carolina, Montana, which is an interesting state. The Republican Steve Daines there is running against a popular former governor in Bullock, and that's a place where Democrats could steal that seat.
So if you believe the polling, the Democrats could be at as much as a plus 54 seats in the United States Senate, or the Republicans could be at 51. Obviously, if we pick up those couple and we have Kamala Harris sitting as the vice president and the leader of the Senate, the Democrats control the United States Senate. And we really begin semantics that could be potentially problematic for our entire country and democracy. You all will remember in 2015, I beg your pardon, when Barack Obama nominated Merrick Garland to the United States Supreme Court, the Republicans had this pious idea that we should be waiting until after the next president of the United States gets selected, especially when we're in the primary season. Well, we're all living through it. That's out the window. They've approved their candidate today in the quickest hearing process we've ever seen. And as a result of it, when it comes to my side of the aisle, we feel as though we've been wrong, and we're right. We have been wrong. The question is, and I think you're going to hear the president push Joe Biden on this tonight, is do you see yourself packing the court as a result of this? Now, Joe Biden said in his town hall from the canceled presidential debate that he would let the American people know prior to the election what he was going to do. I think Joe Biden is an institutionalist and doesn't want to take the country down this road, but I think he is facing extreme pressure, much like the Republicans were, to fill this seat, to go and move forward with packing the court. What could that look like? Could be that we'd have 2 new states here in the next year or so. Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. That'd give us 4 more Democratic senators, 2 more Democratic congressmen, and an ability to expand the Supreme Court even more. What else could that look like? It could be the tipping point in the beginning of the spiral of our democracy, because when does it stop? The pendulum always swings. As a Democrat, I want my 10 pounds of flesh. What we've witnessed from the Republicans is absurd. It's disgusting. It's been a breakdown of our institutions. And that's how the base vote of the Democratic Party feels. Joe Biden and Leader Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are going to be in a tough position of holding their caucuses at the same time trying to maintain the stability of the institutions.
Well, let's take a little peek at the Constitution, shall we? The Constitution says that if there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court, the president shall nominate. And then it says the Senate shall consider and approve. Now, what happened 4 years ago is that the president did nominate Barack Obama, nominated Merrick Garland. The Senate, it has its constitutional role. They decided they weren't going to take up that nomination. That was the Senate's prerogative. We have a separation of powers, a system of checks and balances. In 2020, there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court. The president nominated. He nominated Amy Coney Barrett, and the Senate took up Amy Coney Barrett. They haven't rushed it through. It's about a similar time frame that confirmations have gone through in the past, and the Senate is doing its constitutional duty. I don't consider that a breakdown of the republic. Now, there have been some things over the course of the last 4 years that have given me a little pause. I will confess to that. But this isn't one of them. The president nominated a very well qualified jurist for the Supreme Court. She's going to be confirmed, maybe confirmed today, as a matter of fact. The committee's already voted her out. And, as it relates to the packing of the court, I think it would be regrettable for the system, because if you can add Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states, and then we take power and Northeast Dakota becomes a state.
Although the Constitution says you can't divide states, since you pointed out the Constitution.
Right. But I mean, the Republicans will figure out a way to. It's not a good path forward. And I'm not prepared to say that Biden is going to pack the court. He announced, I guess, he's going to have a commission to study it. That's oftentimes, a place where things go to die.
So one of the other things that we could discuss, we've talked about the presidency, we've talked about the Senate. Maybe one of the other things that I think we both agree on is probably not good for our democracy is some of the changing nature that we're seeing, the way that we're dealing with pressing issues. And we see that for sure here in Missouri, and especially in California, as it relates to what David Broder, the Republican conservative columnist, wrote about, and I tend to agree with him, is a democracy derailed. We are a republic, which we send our representatives to their legislative bodies to act on our behalf, and now we have this system of propositions and amendments that consume the California ballot, is growing in Missouri and every other state, where we're no longer leaving decisions in the hands of the legislators in our republic. We're taking them directly to the people through these petitions, amendments, and et cetera. I believe, along with Mr. Broder, that it's ultimately likely a democracy derailed, and I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah, California's really been at the forefront of this. I mean, you folks, when you go to vote, it's got to take you, a week to get through that thing? You got the page 2, you got page 4 over here, there's another. And, that's not healthy. We've only got 2 constitutional amendments in Missouri this November. That's a little rare, actually. It's a lot lower than it has been in the past. But yeah, that's not a good way to do government. Why even have a legislative branch if the people are going to get to vote on every single thing? That's how they did it in Greece back in the day. Well, of course, they didn't have television to distract them back then.
And for those of you who are in Missouri, it doesn't really matter what you wind up voting, because we have a Republican-held legislature. When the people of Missouri vote on something with almost 60% of the vote, the legislature comes back in 2 months and overrules it. So,
yeah. And the people keep sending Republicans back, so obviously they're not too upset about it.
Well, but it's important to show. I mean, it's just it's a dysfunctional democracy. This is not the case in parts of California, but especially here in Missouri, is term limits, which is we both agree is a disastrous process, and it is ruining the ability to govern in every state house. And if it ever infiltrates itself into the United States Congress would be a disaster.
So, it took us a good 10 years to actually become friends. And so if you think about these states that have term limits at 8 years, there's not a whole lot of, peace and love going on across the aisle. And whoosh, you're in, and whoosh, you're out. And those relationships are important because they're part of what gets things done. Congress is broken, man. We haven't passed a major piece of legislation in the last 10 years that had any level of bipartisan support. You think about Obamacare, not a single Republican. You think about the Trump tax cuts, not a single Democrat voted for it. That's not healthy for democracy.
In fact, the only bipartisan thing we've had happen in this last several years is the impeachment of Donald Trump. The Republicans voted for it.
The stimulus package, the bail, the COVID package was bipartisan. It's kind of a, extreme exigency, kind of an emergency situation. But, one thing that is noteworthy too, other than the number of ballot propositions in California, California is such a trendsetter, for good or for worse, for the rest of the country. And as we're sitting here analyzing the presidential race in all these states across the country, one of the things that we're noting is Republican erosion in the suburbs, and it's real. We've seen it happen. We've got one of the last competitive suburban Republican-held congressional seats in the country right here in the 2nd Congressional District of Missouri. Republican incumbent Ann Wagner facing a race of her life against Democrat State Senator Jill Shoup. Unprecedented amount of money thrown into this thing, and it's a coin toss right now, that race. And what we're seeing play out in suburbia and the rest of America, you all have seen that transformation already. in California.
Yeah, in Orange County, remember the Orange Curtain, you all know it better than any of us, used to be the Republican stronghold of California. And now every representative from the county of Orange County that goes to Washington, D.C. is a Democrat. That's a trend we're seeing throughout the country. It long-term spells bad for the Republicans, as well as what's going on inside the Latino and Hispanic community as they are finding themselves more and more coming to the left side of the aisle. I really wonder what a Republican Party looks like in a post-Trump era, because a lot of the conservative principles have been out the window. And maybe we can talk about that for a second. We have two parties that really are not the same Democrat and Republican Party they were even 10 years ago. I had no idea, and I'm from a labor household, I'm a labor Democrat, out of the Roosevelt, Kennedy style of Democrats, to see the extreme leftist, socialized Democrats that we're seeing. In fact, here in St. Louis, we had the 20-something year incumbent defeated in Lacey Clay by an upstart Ferguson protester in Cori Bush, who's now aligned with what's termed as the Squad AOC and Ilhan Omar and that group. We're seeing this leftist move inside the Democratic Party, a lot of anti-policing beliefs, a lot of change in the way things are spending. And in fact, Cori Bush said yesterday she wants to defund the Pentagon. Boeing's her largest employer in her district. It really makes no sense. And then at the same time, we're seeing Republicans who my entire life were carrying the mantle of Ronald Reagan, which was national defense, anti-Russia, restrictive spending, become the party of Donald Trump and the conservative principles out the window.
Yeah, it is interesting. There's going to be post-election, there's going to be a real interesting dynamic for what the heart and soul of the Republican Party looks like. And, you know, it's clear that under Donald Trump, the Republican Party has become more populist. It's become more nationalistic. You know, this was the Republican Party a generation ago, 10 years ago, was a party of strong alliances, building up our NATO alliances so that when we had crises like having to invade Kuwait, our allies stood with us and we stood with our allies to protect them. And not so much under Donald Trump. He's really focused on America first. He's focused on requiring our allies to pay their fair share of defense spending, and rhetorically has not been particularly sanguine in terms of building up those Western European alliances. It's a different approach. And one of the interesting things I am going to be looking at down the road is which Republican Party is going to emerge from this. And really, it's kind of embodied in a couple of people. So right here in Missouri, our junior senator, Josh Hawley, clearly has kind of taken up this nationalistic populist mantle of Donald Trump's. Notable in the way he's gone after the Facebooks of the world, or the Twitters of the world, in much the same way that the president has rhetorically. And just to the north of Missouri, in the state of Nebraska, is another young U.S. senator by the name of Ben Sasse, who just a week ago really took the president to task for a host of issues. Sasse kind of embodies the traditional movement conservative that the Republican Party once was. Hawley kind of embodies the new Republican Party that's been configured under Donald Trump. And those two young senators, in a very real sense, are going to chart the future of the Republican Party post-Trump. And I'm going to be very interested to see how that plays out. And I can't make a prediction, but I'm going to have my eye on it.
So we're grateful for the time that we've had to be able to spend with you here. I know shortly you're going to get a quick presentation on what's going on potentially from a market perspective. John and I are going to stick around. We'd love to try to answer any of the questions that you may have. To our friends in California, we hope we were okay in speaking to some of the issues that are related out there. If we got something a little wrong, please be understanding that y'all are so cutting edge out there that we're trying to keep up.
Oh, you're doing away with cars. I think, didn't I read somewhere that there's not going to be any cars in California?
No, gasoline cars.
Oh.
We'll be here to answer your questions. We're grateful for your time, and we're grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michael and John. Next up is David Presson to talk about what the market has historically done after an election. After David's presentation, we'll go straight to questions and answers for all three of our presenters. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Joe, and some great commentary there from Mike and John. Thanks, guys. So if we could go to the first slide in the presentation, please. So it's been a very long and strange year, one of the most challenging investment environments I think I've faced in my 30 plus years in the business. For example, we've had shades of 1918 with the pandemic, the 1930s with high unemployment, 1968 with some of the civil unrest, and 1999 with certain high profile tech stocks doing well. And now to top it all off, we have an election coming up on the horizon. Yet despite these headwinds, stocks have bounced back from the dark days of March, and by early September had hit a new all-time high before retrenching some in recent weeks, as you can see by this chart on the screen. It also appears investors at this stage are fairly comfortable with the likely outcome, as our two guests just talked about, on the election, or else we would have seen a more severe retrenchment. If we could go to the next slide, please. I saw a recent survey that indicated 45% of investors with a portfolio of $100,000 or more expected to make some changes in their investments because of the upcoming election. But second guessing your investment strategy, which can be natural, especially with an election on the horizon, emotions are running high as many are divided about what might happen in the financial markets. But is making drastic changes to your portfolio a wise strategy? Making a change to your portfolio should be driven by sound analysis, not an emotional response to current events. So let's turn from making investment changes based on perceptions or emotions to what the evidence has shown us is the best thing to do. So on this slide are some important points to remember and really the backbone of my presentation today. First, it's difficult to identify any specific returns in election years that can be used to get an edge or time the markets. On average, market returns have been positive both in election years and the following years. And market expectations associated with election outcomes are quickly discounted and reflected in today's prices. And finally, regardless of the party in power, markets tend to do well under both. So now let's look at some of the data. If we could go to the next slide. Going back to 1860, there have been 40 elections. And if we look at a standard 60-40 stock bond portfolio, returns during election years have averaged 8.9%. In all non-election years, 8.1%. So not a material difference, though in election years, the markets have done a little better. Let's go to the next slide. Now let's compare returns during election years and after election years. This goes back to 1928, looking at just the stock market here in the US, but the S&P 500 has been up 11.3% during election years. All other years, the year after an election, up 9.9%. So again, not a big difference in the two, and close to the long-term averages of around 10% a year. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now let's examine how the markets have done under different presidents. Since 1929, there's only been 4 presidential terms where the US stock market actually fell. And each of those times was due to special factors, not really related to the election. We had Hoover with the Great Depression, Roosevelt with the start of World War II, the first Bush term with 9/11 and the popping of the tech bubble, and then the second Bush term with the great financial crisis. It's also interesting to note, if you look at the returns under Obama and Reagan, one of those presidents was perceived as very pro-business, the other not so much. Yet the markets returned almost exactly the same under both, up roughly 225%. Let's go to the next slide. So far we've looked at just who's in the White House. Now let's examine the impact Congress has historically had on the stock market. If you look at this slide, it shows that markets have gone up over time regardless of whether Democrats control Congress, Republicans control Congress, or it's mixed. The next slide, please. There's also a perception that the markets tend to be more volatile around elections. The exact opposite is actually true. For the 100 days before and after a presidential election, the markets are actually slightly less volatile than all other time periods. Let's go to the next slide, please. And if we look at today's polls and betting odds, and much as what our guests just outlined, there appears to be a decent chance of a Democratic sweep. And some investors are fearful of what that might look like. But historically, the stock market has fared pretty well under Democratic control, with only 3 declines since 1951. And under Democrats, the stock market has gone up on average 13.2%. If we could go to the next slide. So in summary, I know elections can be very emotional, and you might feel if your candidate or party doesn't win, that it will be a disaster for the country, the economy, or the stock market. Yet historically, this has proven not to be the case. You really have to be careful that you separate your emotions versus making rash investment decisions. We only have to go back to 2016 for a good example. Some market gurus and pundits were saying that if Trump won, the markets would crash. And as the election results came in that evening, and it appeared Trump would actually win, Dow futures were down over 1,000 points as I went to bed that evening around 1 o'clock. Yet by the next morning, the markets had recovered, went up for that day. We had a strong fourth quarter, and the markets had fared fairly well under Trump, hitting new all-time highs. So don't let your emotions guide your investment decisions. As shown by this graph, markets can move quickly in a very short period of time, and even missing a few good days can really dilute your long-term returns. It is much better to stay the course. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. And again, a real shout out and thank you to our two guests. But if you have any follow-up questions or like a copy of my slides, please send me an email to david.presson@fbl.com, or you can always call me at 314-889-1096. So thanks, and I guess we'll open up for questions now.
Right, very good. So just a reminder to submit those questions, go ahead and open up the webinar tool, type a question in there, and we'll go ahead and read that out loud to our speakers. So let's start with the first question that came in here. It says, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was asked by Obama to retire when he was in office so that he could fill the vacancy. She declined. Should there be an age limit on the Supreme Court judges?
Well, the Constitution doesn't provide for that, and so you would have to amend the Constitution, I would think. Well, you could probably do it through statute, actually, because the empowering of the court is vested in the legislative branch to set the standard for the. That's why the Democrats could pack the court, for example. You know, there are age limits for most of the other courts in the country. I don't suppose it's a horrible idea, but I don't know that I have strong feelings one way or the other. It is something that could be done by an act of Congress, though.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings either way, but I do think we're going to see a lot of court reform coming as a result of what we're witnessing happening just today.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. Another question for the both of you. What are some topics on which you agree?
Oh, well, there's a lot of things that.
I'm a better pool player than he is.
Yeah, he's a better pool player, and I'm a better tab picker-upper. So if you ever see us out for lunch, I'm the one buying. You know, John has really moved me a lot on some tax policy issues, and I know that we have a development process here in Missouri called TIF, tax increment financing, which allows a development to come in to a particular area and then tax the consumers, and they pay for it via bonds. Now, as a bank, we like that, right? We like the bonds, we want to buy those, et cetera, et cetera. From a retail standpoint, you know, we both have been educated on this, that it's just something that's cannibalizing existing retail and ultimately handing tax dollars over to private developers, which is just a head scratcher for anybody who believes in the free market, and myself to watch, you know, these, what do they call them? People who make buildings, contractors and developers make all his cash.
Yeah, I have evolved on TIFs. I used to kind of support the concept of TIFs. And the concept of TIFs is good. It's, if you've got an economically disadvantaged area, you incentivize development there. That's a good concept. But in practice, we're just moving Walmarts around in suburbia and handing away tax dollars. And Michael's really kind of educated me about that. And the other place where I've evolved, largely because of him, I think, is on understanding the impact of term limits. So we talked about a little bit earlier. When I was in the legislature, I was a proponent of term limits, thinking that you churn all of that dead wood out of there. But seeing them in practice and then really kind of visiting and understanding the value of relationships in the legislative process, that's really brought my thinking around on that particular issue.
And what's irritating to most people who know us is the fact that we get along with each other. And what's irritating to me about government at every level is nobody gets along with each other. And that's part of the reason we're seeing no compromise. You know, term limits and relationships have deteriorated the way that we get things done. And as a result, we have a government that's essentially doing nothing other than putting out sign belts and yelling at each other.
And this doesn't help either. You know, when you can get on social media and start teeing off on people, you know, it's one of the things. There's a lot of things about Donald Trump that I really like. This is not one of them. And I don't think it's particularly been helpful to the discourse and the dialogue and getting things done. You know, our system was designed by the founders to make it difficult to get things done. Stuff's not supposed to happen quickly. That's all well and good. I actually favor that. But our system was ultimately designed to be able to get some stuff done. And we're getting dangerously close to a place where it's just not happening. And whether it's the 24-hour news cycle or the social media or the, you know, all of the stuff that is going on out there, it's come to the detriment of the efficacy of our government functioning.
Great question, great points. Thank you for that. Another question. You mentioned groups such as suburban women and Latinos and Hispanics appear to be making a move towards the Democratic Party. Are there specific issues that are driving that trend?
Well, I think it's been dealt by Donald Trump, and particularly his immigration issues and building this wall, as he's discussed. That's part of what's moving the Latino vote. I think it's the style of Donald Trump, the language that's being used by the president and his supporters. Even the way the president refers to Kamala Harris as nasty, but Joe Biden as Sleepy Joe. I think the same people who are, you know, the bedrock of our lives, the females who raise kids and who made me who I am today, are all the women in my life, you know, to have to then go and explain to your kid that it's not okay to speak the way the president has. I really believe that as it relates to that, that's why he's seen a huge deterioration amongst suburban women. I'd also throw in the choice question, in particular as a result of what we're witnessing right now with the courts. The choice question, probably now more than ever, is something that people are concerned about. Suburban women have, particularly Catholic suburban women, have swung back and forth on this issue behind parties, you know, but now that it's a real threat, I think that's part of the other reason we're seeing that migration.
Yeah, abortion kind of cuts both ways in the burbs. You know, of women who are pro-choice, that issue has been a problem for Republicans in the suburbs for not just now, it's been, you know, 20, 30 years really. But there's plenty of suburban women who are pro-life on the abortion issue, and that kind of washes itself out. What has deteriorated, in my opinion, if you go back to what brought the suburban women, particularly working suburban women, into the Republican fold, and that was a very reliable voting bloc for Republicans throughout the 80s and 90s and even into the George Bush years, were the pocketbook issues being front and center. And so tax policy mattered. And it's women who often are the folks that are taking care of the home business, paying the bills and purchasing the goods and services for the home. They are the CEOs of their homes in suburbia. And when pocketbook issues leave the top tier of priorities and concerns in suburbia, and I would argue they probably have in the era of Trump, that has, I think, exacerbated some erosion that was already beginning to take place.
You know, the other thing that is a go back to when John was talking about what's going to happen amongst these parties and and really reassessing where they go after this election. I think one of the things that the Republican Party is going to be addressing is whether or not they're going to be a party of just white males. And if you look at the polling, they're killing it with white males, but they're losing in every other place, and white males are quickly sinking in terms of their voting power.
Yeah, we need to do a better job with voters who have 32 teeth. You know, that's gonna help down the road a little bit, and so I think you're gonna look at that. You know, when Mitt Romney lost in 2012, the Republican Party did this entire postmortem about the changing landscape of America and the need to really begin to develop ways to communicate with the Latino vote. And if you look at just culturally, Hispanics culturally are in many respects more aligned with Republican mores and values. But in this current situation with Donald Trump, we've not really made an effort to expand that universe. Now, having said that, Trump in some Hispanic communities across the country is actually performing quite well. You'd be surprised when we don't see it in Missouri because our percent of Hispanic vote is so small compared to nationally. It's one of the reasons why Missouri is not a good bellwether state anymore, like it used to be, because we don't reflect the country as it comes to the Hispanic population. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, the pathway forward for Republicans is to figure out a way to grow and expand our base from our historic situations.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. Another question says, what are some resources to use to be an educated voter instead of being swayed by all the political ads and sound bites?
Well, I would encourage you, I mean, John and I talked about the phone, and the phone allows us to read through the prism that we choose. Whether you believe it or not, the algorithms are feeding you what it is that you typically go and look at. I don't believe all the news is fake news. I believe the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal are credible news sources, but they shouldn't be read inside of a vacuum of just themselves. If you're going to read the New York Times, also read the Wall Street Journal. I think it's important that you understand both sides, and I think that will do it. Political ads are being made to appeal to the lowest common denominator, and that's what John and I do for a living. We're hitting home one point that hopefully is going to trigger you who already believes a certain way to go out and move it. So to answer your question directly, it's to not allow the algorithms to be your sole source of where you seek your news, and to really accept that there's another point of view and to actually read it.
Yeah, and as long as we're living in this polarized, bifurcated world, go expose yourself to what the radicals on the other side are saying. We could certainly go and look at what our own folks that are on the fringes are saying, and should actually, because all of that needs to then filter through our own perceptions. All of us have a worldview that is based on some set of principles that we consider transcendent, that kind of guide our choices, not just in politics, but in life. And it's through that prism that we all have that we take the news. And so I would argue that the more information you can get from a diverse number of perspectives, trust your own worldview to be able to sift through that and assess it. But don't go to just one point of view to find out everything you do. I would not encourage anybody to watch Fox News 18 hours a day. I would not encourage anyone to watch MSNBC 18 hours a day. It'll mess you up.
But I would encourage you to do what we do, which is engage each other, not in a hateful, you're an idiot way, but understand what the adversarial point of yours believes. And I think you'll find that even though you have two divergent views, that ultimately you want the same goal and outcomes. And that's what I think John and I have to say.
And get to understand why the other side thinks the way they think. You know, we live in a country where we're not supposed to agree on everything. That's the whole point. And so we're not going to agree on everything. We shouldn't agree on it. It's good to disagree. It really is. It's healthy. But it's the way in which we do that. And demonizing somebody that disagrees with you is generally not helpful. But we live in a country where we always get a second opinion when we get a bad diagnosis from the doctor. Getting that second opinion in politics is every bit as important.
Thank you. So for me, that's the most important message I've heard of the day. It's exactly what you just said. Let's see, I get time for another one or two here. This one says, do you believe there will be a delayed outcome to the election with the high level of mail-in absentee ballots being submitted?
I don't. I think this is going to be such a victory for Joe Biden. It's not going to be a problem, but John's going to make the non-political argument for you, and he's right.
Yeah, I mean, this is an unusual year. We're having a volume of mail-in votes that we've never seen in the country, and it's taking place in every state. And some state laws are better equipped to deal with it. I would contend that Missouri state law is really good in this regard. Your ballot has to be in by election day, period. That way it gets counted on election night. That's as it should be, in my opinion. There are going to be some states where those ballots aren't going to make it in on time, and there are state laws that allow those ballots to come in post-election to be counted. And if you get a close election, what happens is that whoever loses sends their lawyers in, and they then go through these ballots one at a time. Remember Florida in 2000, the guy with the big eye looking at the Chad, and you're going to have that potentially in one or more of these very close states. Look, our system of elections is the best in the world. It's not perfect. It's the best in the world. And if we can't trust the outcome of our election system in this country, we have done a tremendous and grave, presented a tremendous and grave threat to our democracy. I do trust our electoral system. The people who administer it in many counties of the state, it's a bipartisan board that administers election in the more populous counties of the country. And it's as it should be. And, I'm concerned if Americans lose faith in our electoral system. When you think about what Russia and these other countries, what they're trying to do by influencing, it's not so much influencing the outcome of the election, it is casting doubt in our minds about the legitimacy of our system of government. That's very scary.
Jeez. And if they only didn't have the most powerful human being on the planet helping them put that out there.
All right, very good. Thank you for that. Just like 2 minutes left. Real quick, can you name one thing that you can do or people can do to mend the strong dislike for the other side? If there's one thing we could do today to help, what would we do there?
Find somebody you disagree with and take them to lunch.
Yeah, establish a friendship. When I first met John Hancock, he was a couple of years older than me.
Yeah.
It was washed into me that he was the enemy. And because of the circumstances we were in, where we were combating with each other, we got to know each other. We're not that different. We come from similar families and similar backgrounds. He has a certain belief system. I have a certain belief system, but we both want the same outcome. And I'm afraid when you watch what's on TV or you read what's on social media, it's your opponent is wrong. They're the devil. They must be eliminated. They must be blah, blah, blah. And it's not the case. I love this man with every fiber of my being.
No, it's not.
I can't help it that he is politically misguided, but I've learned a lot from him as a result of it.
Here's something you could do. If you happen to be a Biden supporter out there,
Most of you.
When you go to Thanksgiving and Uncle Cliff is pontificating down there at the edge of the table, and you know who he is, and instead of rolling your eyes at Uncle Cliff, which you did last year, you did, listen to him and try and say, well, why does he think? What are his life experiences that have brought him to try and understand crazy Uncle Cliff? And if you can't, then just pour another glass of wine.
Great. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So let me welcome back our CEO, Shelley Seifert, for some closing comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael and John. I think you have saved Thanksgivings everywhere across the country. And thanks to our very own David Presson. The three of you have brought us meaningful, purposeful, and frankly, calming comments today that I know I really appreciated. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for that. And Joe and I would also like to thank all of you who participated today. Great questions. We look forward to seeing you at future First Bank Center for Family-Owned Businesses events. Wish you all the best. Thanks.
Right. Thanks so much, Shelley. As a reminder, keep a lookout for First Bank emails, and as always, be sure to check our website, first.bank, for the latest information. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. A special thank you to John, Michael, and David for their time and expertise. Please do take just a few moments to complete a brief survey to help us improve our service to you. Have a great day, everyone. We'll catch you next time.